Hello everyone, this is Romano DeFranco back with another episode of the Hockey Stories series. We are coming up to the 50th anniversary of the 1972 Summit Series between Team Canada and the Soviet Union, so I thought this would be the perfect time to talk about a couple of guys who don't nearly get as much credit as they deserve when it comes to Canada laying claim as the greatest hockey nation on the planet. Now, 1972 was 25 years before my time, and I've read a lot about hockey and I prepared a two-part episode on this historic hockey meeting. This week's episode talks about what happened, while the next episode talks about what could have been. Even if you already know the story of the 1972 Summit Series, stick around because I guarantee my story will give you something new to think about. On the other hand, if you are a fairly new hockey fan and aren't really familiar with what the Summit Series is, then sit back and listen to my take on one of the most famous hockey stories of all time. Today, 43% of all NHL players were born in Canada, but back in 1970, that number was 96.1%. Can you believe it? So back then, it was pretty common to say that Canadians hockey players were the best in the world. Hockey was added to the Winter Olympics in 1920, and Canada won 6 of the first 7 gold medals in the event, and Team Canada managed only a silver medal in 1936. But most of the players on the gold medal British squad were either born in Canada or grew up here. But a funny thing happened in 1956. After never having won so much as even a bronze medal in hockey, all of a sudden the Soviet Union went home with the gold, leading Canada with their worst ever finish, a bronze medal. In fact, Canada would have to wait until the 2002 games in Salt Lake City before taking the top spot on the podium. The Soviet Union then went on to win 5 of the next 6 Olympic gold medals, and suddenly the Russians were making a pretty strong case that perhaps they were the greatest hockey nation in the world. So the argument raged on about which nation was superior. The Russians argued that the most recent results at the Olympics clearly demonstrated that they were number one. The Canadians argued that the Olympic doesn't count because they were not allowed to send their best players. Now you might be asking, what do you mean Canada was not allowed to send their best players? It doesn't make any sense. Well, back then, the Olympics were limited to amateur athletes, so players in the NHL were considered ineligible since they were professionals. The players on the Soviet Union squad were all professional soldiers who just happened to be really good hockey players. Now, if you believe that you probably lived in Russia, the fact is these soldiers were really professional hockey players masquerading as amateurs. The two countries argued back and forth on who was the better hockey nation, but inevitably, there was only one way to settle the argument, and that was on the ice. Canada's best would match up against the Soviet Union's best regardless of any of the pro versus amateur nonsense. Planning for the Summit Series started in 1971 with Alan Eagleson running the show for the Canadians, and Boston Bruins coach Harry Sinden who coached the Canadian squad, with tough guy John Ferguson handling assistant duties. Right off the bat, the player selection process for Team Canada was a mess. Bobby Hull had just jumped ship from the NHL to the WHA along with other stars such as Gary Cheevers, Derek Sanderson, and J.C. Tremblay. Sinton and Eagleson had decided that only players in the NHL were eligible, so that left some of Canada's top players on the outside looking in. Coupled that Bobby Orr's off-season knee surgery that kept him out of the lineup, and suddenly you had to wonder if Canada was in fact assembling the best line that they ever had. Orr was coming off a Stanley Cup championship season where he was the leading playoff scorer. Although he was named to Team Canada, it was just ceremonial as there was virtually zero chance of him playing. Phil Esposito, who won the regular season scoring race, was an easy pick, and his brother Tony was another easy pick. The original roster was supposed to be limited to 30 players, but the Canadian delegate fought for and won the decision to set the roster size to 35, and the Canadian team included Bobby Hull, Jerry Cheevers, J.C. Tremblay, Jacques Laperriere, and Derek Sanderson. Laperriere declined his invitation due to his wife's pregnancy, and the other players were later banned from playing by NHL president Clarence Campbell. Pierre Trudeau, who was the very popular Canadian Prime Minister at the time, even intervened on behalf of Bobby Hull, but it didn't work. And that wasn't the only controversy for Team Canada. Fans were fuming over the fact that the players such as Ken Hodge, Dave Keon, and Jacques Lemaire were left off the squad. The Canadian roster was filled out with a mix of youth and veterans, stars and grinders, and more than a few stay-at-home defensemen. The youngest Canadian was Gilbert Perreault, while the oldest was Frank Mahovlich at 34. Team Canada had an average age of over 28 years old and had the slight edge in size, with their players averaging almost 6 feet and weighing in 190 pounds. The Soviets were a younger squad, averaged 4 years younger at 24 years of age. They were slightly smaller, averaging above 5'10", weighing in 6 pounds lighter. On paper, the series looked like it would be a cakewalk for the Canadian squad, and they were basically an NHL All-Star team with some of the best talents ever assembled on one team, and they had sent a scouting party to check out the Soviet squad, and the scouts watched just one game. They witnessed the 20-year-old Soviet goalie Vladislav Tretyak give up 8 goals, and the scouting report was that he couldn't stop anything. Little did the scouts know that Tretyak was out partying the night before his wedding, and that would take place the day after the game. Needless to say, Team Canada went into the series with overconfidence, but it would be short-lived. The first game started off according to script, with Team Canada scoring just 30 seconds into the game and then adding another one 6 minutes later to go up 2-0. But as anyone who has watched hockey enough, the 2-0 lead is the most dangerous lead. And why is that? They stopped doing the hard work that got them the lead, and that allows the other team to come back, and comeback is exactly what the Soviets did, scoring the next 4 goals, after which they never looked back and stunned Canada with a 7-3 victory. Now, I'm not going to go through each game, but Team Canada rejigged the lineup for Game 2 in Toronto and came away with the win. The two teams then continued their journey west, where they ended playing to a 4-4 draw in Winnipeg, with Bobby Hull in the stands watching. This was the first game that the Canadians let slip away after blowing 2 2-goal leads. With the series deadlocked at 1 win, 1 tie, and 1 loss, the series wrapped up the Canadian leg of the journey in Vancouver. Team Canada had just taken 3 points in their last 2 games and really should have won Game 3. The fans in Vancouver were ready to party, expecting that the ship had been righted and that Team Canada would win the final game in Canada and be sent off to Russia in glorious fashion, where they would show the world that Game 1 was a fluke for Russia and that Canadian domination in hockey was proven once and for all. There was just one problem. They laid an egg in Vancouver. Team Canada trailed from just 2 minutes in, and they never really got close in their second loss in the series. The 5-3 score was more flattering for the Canadians than it really was. Dennis Hull scored with just 22 seconds left in the game to make the score respectable, but the fact is they trailed for 58 minutes and the crowd had little to cheer about. Ha! Cheer? The Vancouver fans didn't cheer. In fact, they were merciless as they booed their own team out of the building. You have to check out Phil Esposito's post-game interview with Johnny Essa. So let's recap. After 4 home games in North America, Team Canada had a record of 1 win, 2 losses, and a tie. And they are down the series, and their own fans hate them, and now they have to go to Russia and try to salvage some respectability, to say the least. And that's not all. There was fighting within the team, and 3 players, Vic Hayfield, Rick Martin, and Jocelyn Government, quit the team due to lack of playing time. Ken Dryden had a record of 0-2, while Tony Esposito was undefeated with a 1-1 record. And Harry Sinden might have been reconsidering the goaltending tandem, but he stuck with it as the team headed to Sweden for a couple of tune-up games before flying off to Moscow. It's a pretty famous story that most Canadians over the age of 50 know the ending to. Team Canada blows the first game in Russia. They had the game in the bag and let it slip away before going on to win the next 3 games, with Paul Henderson scoring the game winner in the next 3 games to become a national hero and the only man in Canada who cannot buy a beer in a bar because everyone else wants to buy him one. So everyone knows the story of Paul Henderson's heroics, and Phil Esposito became the heart and soul of Team Canada, leading them in scoring with 13 points in 8 games. And for the record, Yvon Cournoyer had the other game winner for Canada. And Bobby Clarke had a great series with 6 points and may have been responsible for a turning point in the series, taking out Soviet star forward Valery Harlamov with a vicious two-hander to the ankle that sidelined him for Game 7 before returning to play injured in Game 8. And whether you agree or disagree with Clarke's actions, you can't disagree it helped Team Canada out immensely. But since you waited this long, now I want to tell you the 2 guys that I think that they're the real unsung heroes in the 1972 Summit Series. And that's not to take anything away from Henderson and Esposito, but this is the rest of the story, and without these 2 guys, then there may have never been a comeback to talk about 50 years later. The first of the unsung heroics is John Ferguson, who had just retired following the 1970-71 season, but he was a real character guy that head coach Harry Sinden wanted to play in the Summit Series. But the Montreal Canadiens were also trying to woo Ferguson out of retirement, and he didn't want to shun either his old club, the Canadiens, or his country, so he chose to be part of the team as an assistant coach. It is pretty common knowledge in hockey circles that John Ferguson was the guy who basically told Bobby Clarke to go and slash Harlamov and take him out of the game. But that's not why Ferguson gets credit as one of the unsung heroes. Ferguson gets the credit because, as I mentioned earlier, Game 1 in the series was a disaster for Canada. One of Ferguson's best friends was a healthy scratch in the opening game in Montreal. And who was Ferguson's buddy? Well, he was the other unsung hero of the series, and he's Serge Savard. Can you believe that one of the greatest defensemen in Montreal Canadiens history was benched in his own building? That's unbelievable! Well, after the Game 1 debacle, Ferguson went to bat for his friends and convinced Harry Sinden to insert Savard in the lineup for Game 2 in Toronto. Sinden needed some convincing because Savard was still pretty young and was coming off an injury-laden season, which really limited his action. So Savard plays Game 2 in Toronto, and Team Canada wins and remains in the lineup for Game 3, and Team Canada comes away with the tie. And Savard is set to go in the lineup for Game 4 in Vancouver before Red Berenson fires a puck during a practice that hits Savard, fracturing his ankle. And Savard is forced to miss the last game in Canada and the first game in Russia while his ankle recovers. Both of these games were losses, so Team Canada goes 0-3 with Savard out of the lineup and 1-1 with him in the lineup. With his ankle sufficiently healed, Savard plays in the final 3 games, and coincidentally or not, Team Canada wins all 3 games. So, Serge Savard plays in 5 of the 8 games, and Team Canada has a record of 4 wins and 1 tie. So, what do you think? Would Team Canada have gone 7-1 against the Soviet Union if Savard played in all 8 games? Is Serge Savard the real unsung hero of the 1972 Summit Series? And how much credit does John Ferguson get for getting Savard into the lineup? I'd love to hear what you have to say. Leave your comments down below and stay tuned for part 2 of the Hockey Story series of the 1972 Summit Series, where it gives you my picks for the Team Canada roster.